Ancient Egypt, the real secrets of the. Chapter 1. The land where the dead were meant to live forever. Imagine standing beside the Nile more than 4,000 years ago. The sun has disappeared behind the western desert. The river is dark beneath the evening sky. A boat moves slowly through the water. On the eastern bank, people are still working. A farmer returns home. A fisherman pulls his boat onto the shore. A family prepares food. Somewhere nearby, scribes are recording deliveries of grain. And beyond them, rising above the landscape, is something that seems almost impossible. A mountain made by human hands. It is not a natural mountain. It has straight sides. Stones are enormous. Its surface catches the last light of the sun. And although you are standing thousands of years in the past, you are already looking at one of the greatest monuments humanity has ever created. The Great Pyramid. Today we often look at ancient Egypt through a collection of familiar images. Pyramids. Mummies. Pharaohs. Golden masks. Hieroglyphs. Desert tombs. Curses. Hidden chambers. But the real ancient Egypt was much more complicated. It was not simply a civilization obsessed with death. It was a civilization obsessed with continuity. The Egyptians wanted food to continue, families to continue, kingship to continue, the gods to continue, the Nile to continue. And most importantly, they wanted the identity of a person to continue after death. That idea helps explain almost everything we are about to see. The pyramids were not simply giant buildings. The tombs were not simply underground rooms. The mummies were not simply dead bodies. They were parts of a much larger system. A system designed to defeat one thing that no civilization has ever completely defeated: time. The Egyptians knew that kingdoms could fall. They knew that buildings could be damaged. They knew that tombs could be robbed. They knew that human bodies eventually disappeared. And yet they continued trying to create monuments that could survive. Some of them did. The Great Pyramid still stands. The temples of Luxor and Karnak still preserve enormous columns. Royal names remain carved into stone. Mummies remain in museums. Ancient letters survive. And after thousands of years, we can still hear the names of people who lived beside the Nile. That is the real mystery of Egypt. Not aliens. Not magic. Not curses. The mystery is how human beings managed to leave such enormous traces of themselves behind. And tonight we are going to follow those traces. Chapter 2: Before the Pyramids. To understand the pyramids, we need to forget them for a moment. We need to travel back to a time when there were no pyramids. No enormous stone temples. No Valley of the Kings. No golden mask of Tutankhamun. Only the Nile. The geography of Egypt was extraordinary. A narrow strip of fertile land followed the river. Beyond it was desert. The contrast was dramatic. Near the water, crops could grow. Farther away, the landscape became increasingly dry. The Nile was therefore more than a river. It was the foundation of Egyptian civilization. It provided water. It provided transportation. It connected communities. And it created agricultural wealth. Over thousands of years, settlements developed along the river. Political centers emerged. Local rulers gained power. And eventually, the separate regions of Upper and Lower Egypt became part of a unified kingdom. The early history is complicated, and the surviving evidence does not give us a simple story. But by around the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt had become a centralized state. Writing developed as an administrative tool. Officials recorded goods. Royal institutions grew. And Egyptian kingship became one of the most powerful political systems of the ancient world. The earliest royal tombs were not pyramids. They were structures known as mastabas. These were rectangular monuments built above underground burial chambers. Then something extraordinary happened. An architect named Imhotep, working for King Djoser, transformed the traditional form. Instead of building one mastaba, builders placed several levels on top of one another. The result was the step pyramid at Saqqara. It was a revolutionary moment. But perhaps the most important thing about it is what it tells us. The Egyptians did not wake up one morning and decide, let's build the Great Pyramid. They experimented. They made mistakes. They changed designs. They learned. The pyramids were the result of generations of accumulated knowledge. That is something we often forget when we look at ancient monuments. We see the final masterpiece. We do not see the thousands of smaller experiments that came before it. Chapter 3: The Pharaoh. So who ordered these enormous monuments to be built? The Pharaoh. But the word Pharaoh can give us the wrong impression. A pharaoh was not simply a king with a crown. Egyptian kingship was deeply connected to religion. The king was expected to maintain order. The Egyptians called this principle Ma'at. Ma'at involved balance, order, justice, and proper cosmic arrangement. The opposite was disorder, chaos. The king therefore had a religious responsibility. His rule was supposed to maintain the balance of the world. This explains why Egyptian royal art looks so different from modern political portraits. A pharaoh is often shown as youthful, strong, calm, perfect, even when the real person was old, sick, or physically imperfect. The purpose was not necessarily to create a realistic photograph. The image represented the ideal king. A king who defeated chaos. A king who protected Egypt. A king who stood between humanity and the divine. And yet there is something important to remember. The pharaoh did not build Egypt alone. Behind every royal monument were thousands of other people. Farmers, stoneworkers, boatmen, bakers, brewers, scribes, artists, priests, soldiers, servants, doctors, animal handlers, administrators. The pyramid may have carried the name of a king, but an entire society made it possible. Chapter 4: The Great Pyramid. Now we return to Giza. The Great Pyramid was built for Khufu, a 4th dynasty king. When it was completed, it was approximately 146.6 meters high. Today it is shorter because its outer casing has disappeared. Imagine the original monument. Smooth white limestone covering the enormous structure. Sunlight reflecting from its surface. From a distance, it must have appeared almost impossible. The pyramid was not simply placed in the desert. It was part of a complex. Temples, causeways, other tombs, and funerary installations surrounded it. But then comes the question that has fascinated people for centuries. How did they build it? We do not possess a complete Egyptian construction manual. That means some details remain uncertain. And this is where exaggerated stories often begin. Someone sees the uncertainty and says, "Therefore, the Egyptians couldn't have done it." But uncertainty does not equal impossibility. We know Egyptians possess copper tools. We know they worked stone. We know they transported enormous objects. We know they used sledges. Ancient Egyptian art shows large objects being dragged on sledges. The Egyptians also had something even more important: experience. The Great Pyramid was not their first pyramid. It was the product of centuries of architectural experimentation. The bent pyramid at Dashur is particularly revealing. Its angle changes part way up. Why? Because something about the original design had to be changed. The monument itself preserves evidence of the learning process. That is fascinating. The ancient Egyptians were not using mysterious technology. They were solving engineering problems. And sometimes they solved them while building. Chapter 5. The people who built the pyramids. There is another myth we need to examine. Who actually built the pyramids? For a long time, popular culture imagined enormous armies of slaves. Thousands of exhausted people. Whips. Chains. Stone blocks. But archaeology gives us a more complicated picture. The workforce included skilled workers and organized labor. Quarry workers. Stonecutters. Transport crews. Builders. Administrators. Food producers. The pyramid project required enormous amounts of food. Imagine the logistics. If thousands of people are working at Giza, they need bread. They need water. They need beer. They need meat. They need tools. They need housing. They need medical care. They need supervisors. They need transportation. This means the pyramid was not merely a construction project. It was an economic system. Evidence from Giza includes workers' settlements, food production, administrative remains, and marks left by work gangs. And perhaps the most fascinating evidence comes from the workers themselves. Their names and group identities sometimes appear on the stones. Suddenly the pyramid becomes personal. These were not invisible hands. They were teams. People who lived, worked, ate, complained, rested, and eventually died. The pyramid was built to preserve the king's memory. But unintentionally, it also preserved evidence of the workers. Chapter 6. Why did they build pyramids? Why build something so enormous? The obvious answer is that it was a tomb. But that is only part of the story. The pyramid was part of a religious landscape. The king's death was not imagined as the simple end of existence. The king was supposed to continue. The burial complex provided a place where offerings could be made. Rituals could continue. The king's identity could be preserved. The monument itself became a statement of eternal kingship. The pyramid was therefore architecture with a religious purpose. It was also political. Imagine what it communicates to everyone who sees it. The king has enormous resources. The state can mobilize thousands of people. Stone can be transported from distant places. The king's name can be carved into monuments. This is power made physical. A pyramid is therefore simultaneously a tomb, a religious monument, a political statement, an engineering achievement, and a monument to memory. Chapter 7: The Gods of Egypt. Ancient Egypt had many gods. But Egyptian religion was not a single simple list of deities. Beliefs changed across time. Different cities emphasized different gods. Some gods merged. Some became more important. Some declined. Ra was associated with the sun. Osiris became closely connected with death and resurrection. Isis became one of the most important goddesses. Horus was associated with kingship. Anubis was strongly connected with funerary practices. The gods were not simply characters in stories. They were part of a system through which Egyptians understood the universe. The Nile, the sun, death, birth, kingship, nature, order, chaos. The temple was central to this system. And temples were not simply churches in the modern sense. They could control land, store grain, employ workers, manage wealth, perform rituals. A major temple was also an economic institution. This means religion and government were deeply connected. Chapter 8: Death was not the end. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Egypt is its relationship with death. We see thousands of mummies and assume Egyptians were obsessed with dying. But from their perspective, the goal was not death. The goal was continued existence. They wanted the dead to continue. They wanted names remembered. They wanted offerings provided. They wanted the body preserved. They wanted protection for the journey beyond death. That is why mummification became so important. In developed forms, the body was dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture. Internal organs were commonly removed and preserved separately. Oils and resins could be applied, and the body was wrapped in linen. Amulets could be placed among the wrappings. The process changed over thousands of years. There was never one single unchanging method. Modern CT scans can investigate mummies without physically unwrapping them. Bones can reveal age and injury. Teeth can reveal aspects of diet and health. Chemical analysis can identify embalming substances. The mummy is therefore more than a preserved body. It is an archaeological archive. Chapter 9: The Book of the Dead. The Egyptians also left instructions for the dead. One of the most famous collections is what we call the Book of the Dead. But there is an important correction. It was not one single book. It was a collection of funerary spells. Different manuscripts contain different selections. The texts were intended to protect and guide the deceased. Imagine being an ancient Egyptian preparing for death. Your tomb contains food. Your coffin carries your name. Your body has been preserved. And beside you are texts intended to help you navigate what comes next. One of the most famous scenes shows the weighing of the heart. The deceased stands before judgment. The heart is weighed against a feather associated with Mot. The scene captures a central Egyptian idea. Your life mattered. Your behavior mattered. Your relationship with order mattered. Death was not simply disappearance. It was a transition. Chapter 10: The Tomb Robbers. But there was a terrible problem. The Egyptians wanted their dead to rest forever. Human beings had other plans. Tomb robbery became a major problem. A wealthy tomb could contain valuable objects: gold, jewelry, fine furniture, clothing, weapons, food, precious stones. Anything valuable could become a target. This created an extraordinary contradiction. Egyptians built tombs to preserve memory. Robbers entered them to take their contents. Eventually, royal burial practices changed. Instead of enormous pyramids visible from miles away, kings began using hidden rock-cut tombs. The Valley of the Kings became one of the most important royal burial landscapes. But even secrecy did not guarantee safety. Many tombs were robbed. Some royal mummies were moved by ancient priests to protect them. And this creates another mystery for modern archaeologists. Sometimes the body we find is not in the tomb where it was originally buried. The ancient Egyptians themselves were trying to protect their ancestors. They became the first protectors of the archaeological record. Chapter 11: The people who lived beside the royal tombs. Not far from the Valley of the Kings was the workers' settlement at Deir el-Medina. Here lived people whose job was to create the royal tombs: artists, stoneworkers, craftsmen. Their settlement provides something rare: ordinary voices. The enormous temples tell us what kings wanted remembered. The royal tombs tell us what kings wanted to believe about eternity. But Deir el-Medina tells us about people. Their homes. Their families. Their work. Their disputes. Their religion. Their problems. Even their absences from work. And this is one of the most beautiful things about archaeology. The smallest evidence can sometimes tell us more about ordinary life than the largest monument. A broken bowl. A child's object. A worker's note. A food container. A tool. These objects were never intended to become famous. But thousands of years later, they are among our best clues. Chapter 12: Tutankhamun. Now we arrive at one of the most famous names in Egyptian history. Tutankhamun. The Boy King. His reign was short. His tomb was not particularly large compared with some royal tombs. But when Howard Carter's team discovered it in 1922, they found an extraordinary collection of objects: furniture, chariots, weapons, clothing, jewelry, ritual objects, and the famous golden mask. The discovery transformed modern fascination with Egypt. Then newspapers discovered something even more exciting: a curse. The idea was simple. Anyone who disturbed the tomb would die. It was perfect for the public imagination. But there is a problem. There is no reliable evidence establishing a supernatural curse. The curse is a story. The tomb is real. And the real tomb is much more interesting. Tutankhamun lived during a period of enormous religious change. His predecessor Akhenaten had disrupted traditional religious institutions. Tutankhamun's reign helped restore older traditions. So the young king's burial is not simply a treasure chamber. It is evidence from one of the most dramatic political and religious transitions in Egyptian history. Chapter 13: Hatshepsut. Before Tutankhamun, another remarkable ruler controlled Egypt. Her name was Hatshepsut. She ruled during the 18th dynasty. And she did something extraordinary. She presented herself as king. Not simply queen. King. This is important because Egyptian kingship had a visual language. Royal titles. Crowns. Ceremonial clothing. Symbols. Hatshepsut adopted that language. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari remains one of Egypt's great monuments. Reliefs describe an expedition to Punt. The expedition brought exotic products back to Egypt. It demonstrates something important. Egypt was not isolated. The Nile connected the country internally. But Egypt also connected with neighboring regions through trade and diplomacy. Hatshepsut's reign was therefore about more than gender. It was about royal legitimacy, political authority, trade, religion, and memory. After her death, some representations associated with her were altered or removed. Why? That remains debated. And this is another example where we should resist an easy answer. History is rarely a single sentence. Chapter 14 Akhenaten. Then Egypt experienced one of its strangest royal experiments. A king named Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten. He elevated the Aten, represented as the solar disk. He built a new capital at Amarna. Traditional religious institutions were disrupted. The artistic style changed. Royal family scenes became unusually intimate. The king and queen were shown with their children. The Aten's rays extended downward, ending in hands. It looks completely different from earlier Egyptian art. Was Akhenaten a monotheist? The answer is complicated. The Aten was elevated dramatically, but Egyptian religion had always been complex. The important fact is that Akhenaten attempted to transform the religious system. And after his death, the transformation collapsed. Traditional gods returned. The old capital system was restored. Tutankhamun became part of that restoration. Akhenaten's city was abandoned. His memory was later minimized. This gives us an extraordinary historical lesson. A king could be powerful enough to transform an entire religious system. But even a king could not guarantee that his transformation would survive him. Chapter 15 Ramesses the Great. Few Egyptian rulers left a larger physical footprint than Ramesses II. He ruled for approximately 66 years. His statues are enormous. His temples are enormous. His inscriptions are everywhere. He understood something fundamental about political power. If you want to be remembered, build something people cannot ignore. Ramesses also fought the Hittites. The Battle of Kadesh became one of his most famous military achievements. But here we need to be careful. Ramesses' own inscriptions present him as a heroic victor. That is propaganda. But it is propaganda. The eventual relationship between Egypt and the Hittites developed into diplomacy and peace. A treaty followed. This is another lesson from Egyptian history. The king's monument tells us what he wanted people to believe. Other evidence allows us to reconstruct what happened more broadly. Chapter 16 The Rosetta Stone. Then something extraordinary happened thousands of years later. Ancient Egyptian writing had become unreadable. Hieroglyphs covered temples. They covered tombs. They covered statues. But the language was largely lost to modern readers. Then in 1799, a stone was discovered near the town of Rashid, known in Europe as Rosetta. The stone contained a decree written in 3 scripts. Hieroglyphic. Demotic. Greek. Greek could be read. That provided the key. The decipherment was not instantaneous. Scholars compared signs. They studied royal names. They compared languages. Thomas Young made important advances. Jean-François Champollion eventually established the breakthrough needed to read Egyptian hieroglyphs systematically. Suddenly Egypt could speak again. A name on a temple could be read. A royal title could be understood. A funerary prayer could be translated. A decree could be examined. A civilization that had been silent to modern readers began speaking through its own words. Chapter 17. What science is still discovering. And the story is not finished. Modern archaeology has tools that ancient explorers could never have imagined. CT scanners can look inside mummies without unwrapping them. Scientists can examine bones, teeth, residues, pigments, textiles, DNA. Researchers can map archaeological landscapes. They can identify structures beneath the ground. They can investigate spaces inside monuments. But technology does not magically answer every question. Suppose scientists discover an empty space inside a pyramid. That is exciting. But what is the space? A chamber? A corridor? A structural feature? Something else? The discovery is real. The interpretation may remain uncertain. And this is perhaps the most important lesson of modern Egyptology. We don't have to pretend we know more than we do. A genuine mystery is more interesting than a fake answer. Chapter 18. The End of Pharaonic Egypt. Ancient Egypt lasted an extraordinarily long time. The civilization did not simply collapse overnight. Egypt experienced foreign rule, Persian rule, Greek rule, Roman rule. Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BCE. The Ptolemaic dynasty followed. Cleopatra VII became its most famous ruler. After her death, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. But this was not the disappearance of the Egyptian people. That distinction matters. A political system can disappear. A culture can transform. A language can evolve. A religion can change. But people continue. Egypt did not become an empty desert. The Nile remained. Communities remained. The descendants of ancient Egyptians remained. The ancient world transformed into something new. Chapter 19. The Secrets We Still Don't Know. After thousands of years of excavation, Egypt still contains unanswered questions. There are monuments we do not fully understand. Tombs whose owners remain uncertain. Objects whose exact purpose is debated. Lost texts. Destroyed temples. Unexcavated settlements. And perhaps the greatest mystery is the ordinary Egyptian. We know a great deal about kings. But what did an ordinary farmer dream about? What did a child fear? What did a worker say to his friend at the end of a long day? What did a mother tell her daughter? What did a young man hope his life would become? Most of those voices are gone. Archaeology can recover fragments. But not everything. And perhaps that is why Egypt feels so mysterious. We have enormous monuments. But behind those monuments were millions of ordinary lives. Most left almost no trace. Final chapter. The real secret of ancient Egypt. So what was the secret? Was it alien technology? No. Was Tutankhamun's curse real? There is no good evidence for that. Was Egypt built by a mysterious lost civilization? No. The archaeological evidence points to Egyptians. Human beings. Builders. Farmers. Artists. Priests. Scribes. Kings. Mothers. Fathers. Children. People who lived beside the Nile thousands of years ago. They did not possess modern machines. But they possessed something else. Time. Organization. Knowledge. Experience. And ambition. Generation after generation they learned. They built. They changed. They failed. They tried again. They created monuments that were supposed to last forever. And some nearly did. The Great Pyramid still stands. The temples still rise from the desert. The names of kings remain carved into stone. Mummies remain. Paint remains. Jewelry remains. Writing remains. And now, thousands of years later, we can look at those things and remember that these were once not artifacts. They were someone's life. A gold mask was once made for a dead king. A piece of pottery was once held by someone's hand. A letter was once written by someone who expected another person to read it. A tomb was once prepared because a family believed someone they loved would continue beyond death. Pyramid was once new. That may be the strangest thought of all. Imagine the day the Great Pyramid was completed. The stone was fresh. The surfaces were bright. The workers were gone. The priests performed rituals. The king's burial complex was new. People could look at it and think, this will last forever. They were wrong about forever. But they were remarkably close. 4,500 years later, we are still looking. Still asking questions. Still studying the stones. Still reading the names. Still trying to understand the people who built them. And perhaps that is the greatest secret ancient Egypt left behind. Not a hidden treasure. Not a curse. Not a supernatural machine. But a message written across thousands of years. Human beings disappear. But what they create can sometimes outlive them. And tonight, as the Nile continues to flow through the same ancient landscape, the pyramids continue to stand beneath the Egyptian sky. The civilization that built them has changed beyond recognition. The kings are gone. The workers are gone. The priests are gone. The ancient languages changed. The old temples became ruins. But the evidence remains. And as long as someone is willing to look closely, ancient Egypt is still speaking. Suggested YouTube chapters. Midnight, the land where the dead were meant to live forever. 4 o'clock before the pyramids. 8 o'clock the Pharaoh. 12 o'clock the Great Pyramid. 1700 hours the people who built the pyramids. 2100 hours why did they build pyramids? 2400 hours the gods of Egypt. 28:00 death was not the end. 32:00 the Book of the Dead. 35:00 the tomb robbers. 38:00 the people beside the royal tombs. 41:00 Tutankhamun. 45:00 Hatshepsut. 48:00 Akhenaten. 51:00 Ramesses the Great. 54:00 the Rosetta Stone. 56:00 What science is still discovering? 58:00 The end of Pharaonic Egypt. 59:00 The real secret of ancient Egypt. Fact-checking principles for the video. A human construction is supported by archaeological evidence. There is no need to invoke aliens or lost super technology. The pyramid workforce should not be reduced to the popular image of chained slaves. Evidence points to organized labor including skilled workers. The Tutankhamun curse is a modern legend and is not established as a supernatural historical event. Ancient Egyptian religion changed substantially across periods and regions. Royal inscriptions can be valuable historical evidence, while also serving political and religious propaganda. When evidence is incomplete, the narration explicitly says that the exact answer remains uncertain. Research references. A Smithsonian Institution, Ancient Egypt, Pyramids, Construction Evidence, Mummies and Egyptian Archaeology. A British Museum, Ancient Egypt Collections and Galleries, Mummies, Funerary Practice, the Book of the Dead, Egyptian Sculpture and the Rosetta Stone. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, Hatshepsut and Egyptian Art Collections. The UNESCO World Heritage Center, Memphis and its necropolis, and Ancient Thebes with its necropolis.